happy to be here with you folks and chat things around together.
We're delighted to have you on. Thank you so much. All right, so
Approval of minutes.
approval of minutes. As everybody has a chance to read the minutes from the last meeting.
Yep.
Any comments? Addition, edits?
Move to adopt the minutes of the meeting.
All in favor? Motion carries. How many are you today? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Seven. Everything else in that. So 7-0. Okay. Audra, would you give us the town manager update, please?
Sure, so, I
We have
thinking
10
that a
minutes.
lot of you are, what's that?
10 minutes.
Yeah, I won't need that long. So I know a lot of you are probably aware that one of the agenda items for the select board meeting tonight is, the select board is going to be discussing a donation that's been made by the Montgomery family for, repair work to the Montgomery Dam. So, there's some work that has been done pretty recently by the Public Works Department. Because the gate on the dam, despite 3 different attempts to repair it this summer, it really is in such poor condition that the frame is completely rotten, that the gate is on, and the whole mechanism needed work done to it because it just wasn't at the point where it was actually, sealing the sluiceway entrance shut anymore, and it was, rotted away, and every time it had to be raised or lowered, it would get stuck or something would get trapped in it. So some work has been done also on the concrete side of the dam that's more towards the public landing, and that's helped with the the water flowing over the front facing crest of the spillway. So between those sort of repairs that are temporary, but they're going to hold up for a few years yet. A lot of the money that's been proposed to be donated to the town, there are a few other things that it could be used for, but beyond some of the work that's currently been done, and some of the more aesthetic kind of landscaping or cleaning out of the impoundment, it would really be kind of like a more long-term commitment if the town accepts those funds. And there's some consequences around that one way or another. So I think that the select board is going to be talking about some of that tonight, and it's a discussion item, but there's a chance that they might move to make it an action item. So just thought it would be a good update for the committee to know about that discussion.
Yeah, I mean, would the committee be able to make recommendations on how to use that donation? And would that be of interest to the committee to work on something like this?
I mean, it's pretty normal when the committee, a committee working on something that's related to business of the select board, that the select board would ask for a recommendation.
As we do with the harbor committee is working on a couple of ordinances for us, so the role of the committees are to give recommendations, so maybe something.
I have a quick question on that point. I thought there might be a stipulation that the money had to be used for 3, which is really soon. Is that true, or is that?
From what I understand, it is, from both the letter that the select board received from the executors of the estate, as well as our attorney reached out to their attorney who wrote the letter. And so they said by the end of 2023. So that would really rule out, any sort of large scale masonry repair, both because there's just not enough time to line up a contractor to do it, or a contractor available. And, with all the rain that we've gotten over the summer, it's, it just hasn't really been dry enough to do any large scale repairs of that kind of that nature, really.
I have a second question. Is maybe this will be discussed with the select board meeting, but I'm just wondering what could be the repercussions if we do repair significantly the dam per our grant, like getting grants for restoration and things like that. Would it impede our chances of getting a grant? Do we know?
We've tried asking, but it's just I think it's so difficult for them to answer that question unless they know exactly what's going to happen and the extent of it. And I also think there's sort of like the community expectation around it. So it's not even like the technical, like grant requirement expectation, but this sort of just sentiment that if donors come forward and donated, hundreds of thousands of dollars and you've accepted it, and you've spent it for this purpose, then, it would be unethical to come through years later and remove or destroy that, the funds that were spent for that purpose. So I think that that's almost a harder problem to solve than the grant issue, is that community expectation once that money's been accepted.
Just to follow up on that point, then would that necessitate a town vote if we're gonna be using that much money for something?
No, so the select board has the authority to accept and spend gift and grant money.
Okay.
Yeah,
And has the sluice gate been repaired so that it is functioning at this point? Or are there more repairs that need to be done to it?
so it's currently being fabricated and then they'll have to install it. Yeah.
And will the cost of that take up a sizable amount of the gift or no?
No, but at the same time, that is something I would imagine that the gift could be used for theoretically, if they want, maintenance or repairs to the dam and all the structures around it. So, maybe it's a matter of something, being reimbursed for the work that the town has already done or is in the middle of doing. And another thing that I thought would be something that a lot of people would be in agreement that it would be a beneficial thing to do, and I don't think it would put the grant money in jeopardy at all, is focusing on the impoundment and cleaning the sediment out of that, because that's causing a lot of the ongoing issues with the gate. Because when it's open and closed, the sediment gets trapped in it, or debris that, is clogging the sediment gets trapped in the gate, and that causes issues with the mechanism. It breaks it over and over again. So, I think that the way that it looks when there's a drawdown, nobody likes that. Nobody likes seeing all that mud exposed. So I think, removing it, one, addresses that problem, and two, it's inevitably going to have to be open for an extended period of time when the work is done on the Route 1 bridge, and also the water company's talking about replacing the water main that goes under that bridge. So it's inevitable that, in the future, the near future of Camden, we're talking the next few years, there's going to be a drawdown that's the reality for months on end. So I think cleaning out that impoundment, that's a very expensive endeavor, because not only are you removing that sediment, you have to dewater it, and then you have to find a place where it needs to be hauled away to and landfilled, and that's all very costly. So that, I think, if the donors would consider that as a use of that money, that would be, I think, beneficial for a lot of different parties involved in all of this.
That sounds like a great idea. I mean, to me, that's something that would need to be done no matter what happened to the
Right.
dam. At least I would think.
Right, yeah, no, you're absolutely right.
How restrictive does it appear the donation use is based on the letter?
The letter is very, pretty open. It just really has the time frame and it, maintenance of the dam, so.
I would think that would be a great recommendation to the committee to suggest that they consider cleaning up or. Can that be done within the remainder of this calendar year?
I don't know about that. It's something that we haven't really looked into at this point, but I know it. I don't know for a fact, but that's something that typically is less time intensive than having like a specialized contractor, like a masonry contractor, to get in there to do that kind of work.
I would think if we had a contract with intent to do that, that may.
That's what I was
But at least if we had a signed contract with intent to do that, that at least would show them.
Yeah.
So how do we go about the next steps with this, or what do you recommend?
Well, I guess if the committee would like to make a recommendation, you could choose to proactively do so, or, Sophie and Chris as the liaisons could go back to the select board and say that if they so choose, they would like the committee to weigh in with a recommendation. So I think that that's, as it relates to the committee, potential paths forward for you to have some sort of ability to weigh in.
Anyone who has not spoken on this issue, want to weigh in, Tyler? Or Alan? Okay. Okay, anything else around?
Whether.
Or do you want to vote on this? What, how do you want to?
One of this, the select board hasn't even accepted it yet.
Right.
So, I need to be very ahead of time to make a recommendation from this committee.
That's-
But I would say they might move to an action item.
An action item tonight, so in which case we could. Yeah, we could, make a recommendation.
But
We can
I
also
think
make
the
a recommend-
consensus of this committee is that we'd be willing to
Make a recommendation.
make a recommendation how to
Yeah,
appropriately use the funds.
cool. So we can bring that back to the select board and then give you a bit more time, but.
Just one other concern I might have, and that is. Are we? I'm reluctant or hesitant to take any steps that. Thereafter commit us to going in a particular direction, kind of related to what Audrey was saying about. Bad optics, if nothing worse. Than, spending a lot of money on a thing and then deciding to destroy it at some point or whatever later.
The point you made, that the sediment has to be removed no matter
No
what.
matter what, so
And Mike said had an idea of how much sediment there was in that.
as long as we're confident that. That there is flexibility in terms of how it can be used, and I'd be on board.
And I think along the same lines, I mean, right now, it seems like Public Works has a list of things on that dam that they've developed without this committee, that they can probably keep checking those things off without our guidance to maintain your optics.
And we can look after whether or not it might impede our ability to get the grant. Moving forward, if we decide to remove. I mean, that's a concern that we have.
And I think we also should say that we are not recommending absolutely that you should accept this grant. We are neutral on that stance.
We're here to help.
Okay, that's very cool.
I don't
Right.
think that should prevent anybody from going to meetings and I can.
Oh, no,
voice my
absolutely
opinions.
not.
There's a-
Absolutely not. You wear a different hat.
I just want to make sure that before we move away from this, that
Exactly,
everybody's clear. And I'm
everybody's clear
not
what
sure
we're
if
doing.
we are.
So number one, if the select board would care to ask the committee to make a recommendation, you would be happy to work on a recommendation. My understanding is clearly. Number, yes, Rick, is this the regular Rick eye?
Is this one?
Okay. So you gladly work on a recommendation should the select board request the committee to make one. Number two, you're not recommending to the select board to either receive or refuse
Absolutely.
that donation. You're neutral. But as Courtney said, if the select board accepts the donation, you are here to help. It's a good
So if
sign.
they move it to an actionable item,
So. Finish the sentence?
if they move it to an actionable item, our thought is to consider removing some of the sediment and perhaps looking at the impoundment area.
with any extra available funds from what the main purpose of the gift was.
Okay.
Okay, which is really the wall, the dam and the sluice gate.
Is that?
Is that written in?
Yeah, that's right here.
Is that written in?
I believe it is.
No.
No,
No,
it's
Okay.
just maintenance and.
it just says maintenance of the dam.
Do we have the letter in the packet?
No,
Okay.
I didn't see it till today.
Okay.
Is it
My-
possible?
Yeah, maybe
that they'll
just-
follow up with more requests for how money would be spent, or? Do you know?
If it's moved to an actionable item, will they vote how to use that money right then and there or not?
Hold on a minute, okay? The funds would be designated for use during the calendar year 2023 on maintenance of the concrete surface of the dam, maintenance of the sluiceway gate, and cleanup of the island and waterfall. Nothing about the impoundment area behind that. That's what is specifies in this letter.
It's a shall,
Huh? What?
is it a shall
Is it a shower?
or a may?
written by a lawyer.
Would be,
Should.
would be,
Should, will.
would be.
Is that the letter to the select board?
That's the letter from the representative of the family to the select board. Yes, specifying those areas.
My guess is they would probably come to an agreement before you accepted the funds. You'd come to an agreement how they would be allocated. I think that would probably be in the best interest of both parties, I would think.
I agree with you.
Put conditions on it on the front end. so we-
Yeah, I mean, you don't want to have some sort of false things one way or the other.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, you'd be surprised though, how
I know.
often money is just sort of like given for different projects and there's pretty
Very
vague.
specific
Yeah,
about
that's
the
very
concrete
specific,
surface of
yes.
the dam, which totally needs repair, the sluiceway gate,
Mhm.
and the island and the outside the waterfall. Okay,
Yeah.
going down to the harbor,
Very
which needs to be cleaned up, is very specific about what
say shall or may to get to this question?
This is would be,
the funds would be. Not- no shall.
what is the preposition?
Would be designated for. That's kind of specific.
That's sort of awesome.
That's kind of specific for those three areas.
What is the reason for it being within the next 4 months?
I don't know.
Was that, so with it being that specific, it seems like it'd be hard to fit into those parameters in that length of time.
Tax benefits?
Well, right.
Right, could be.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Yeah, if that's the reason, then the work wouldn't actually necessarily be done, and by 2023, the money transfer would have to be.
Right.
Could it also be that we're in this, we have this committee going, we have all this momentum, and this group that really cares about the dam wants it to be done as soon as possible before they make the decision? Yeah, that's how it sounds to me. But. Why else? I don't know.
I don't know why, the first time I heard about this was last night, casually.
Yeah.
In conversation with people, I'm wondering when was the letter drafted, the offer made?
It says
They-
July
this is
18th, but we
18th.
didn't get it until,
24th of July, it says.
Yeah.
yeah,
It would have been nicer to like chew on this for more than
yeah.
4 hours.
Well, we can chew on it,
I think the select board's gonna chew on it tonight,
yeah.
so I don't think it's on our plate at all at this point. So, I mean, I think an interesting question would be whether this group was interested in allocating some of that money to potentially work that's already gone on. It sounds like there's already sluice gate work proceeding
And concrete work.
and concrete work perhaps there.
Is that something that might be able to be negotiated then with the donors?
I would say, maybe the reimbursement for the work that's already been done or the commissioning of the gate and the installation of the gate. I would say that we've already spoken to a contractor about, the concrete surface of the concrete spillway and would they have time to do it before the end of 2023? And it's just not. It was Knowles Industrial Services. So they do work all throughout town. They've done, the quotes that we've received in the past have been, they did the Opera House repointing. And there's just no way to fit us in and they try to prioritize us because we are a kind of frequent customers there, so.
Good client.
Yeah. So I mean, even with all of that, that's just not practical to do that level of masonry work in that small amount of time with so wet a summer.
So I think our first step is to kind of wait and see what the select board says tonight. If they want the committee to work on a couple of recommendations. Given the short time frame, we may have to have an extraordinary meeting of the committee, maybe if need be, things like that. But I think what's important is that the committee is willing to look at recommendation and work with the select board on potentially making recommendation on how to use that donation. Right. Okay. Okay,
I can follow up with the committee tomorrow based on the decision, and then we can sort of make a little committee, or unless everyone wants to be there, and we can workshop what our recommendation would be if the select board deems they want to hear from us.
I mean, to the extent that there is any question by the other select board members about what, if anything, we had to say about it, I mean, I think you can share the sets of concerns that we individually brought out here. I don't like the idea just personally, I'll reiterate this, just, I don't like the idea of being locked into particular uses for this. But if it were some flexibility or afforded.
Yeah.
I'd be okay going down that way.
You didn't think you needed the whole 10 minutes.
Anything, so, okay. Great, I'm gonna close this item. Awesome. Lauren,
Did you have any other updates, Audra?
oh, sorry, yeah,
That's it.
Sorry.
no, good call. Lauren, can I give you 7 minutes to give an update on your project?
That's perfect, more than enough.
Thank you.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. I've talked to all of you so far, so you know what my project is about. But I wanted to give a quick rundown on what I've done this summer and the things that I've learned to give it back to you. That was the whole purpose in the beginning, was to gather information for you guys. So I started this project with the intent to talk to as many Camden residents as possible. And I did that by starting with the committee and starting with the people that I knew were involved in this project, mostly town representatives, and then asking them who they think I should talk to. And that web kind of grew and grew and grew. And I didn't realize it, but 60+ people later, I've talked to quite a wide range of Camden residents, Lincolnville and Hope residents that kind of span a large spectrum of people. And so, you know, younger to older, parents, you know, retirees, they work in businesses, they work in the schools. They've been in Camden for their entire lives. They've been in Camden for 2 years. And so it's been really fascinating work so far. And I've learned a lot. And I think the most important thing that I've learned is that everyone that I've talked to really cares about what happens with the town. Everything they said has come from a place of, I really care about this. And some folks, you know, didn't really know much about the watershed project. And so those interviews offered me a time to explain what the committee was doing and that process, and to encourage them to get involved. You know, some people were really surprised that there were 7 dams along the river. They had no idea. And so that was a fun, you know, interesting thing for them to learn. And I think from also after talking with these people, there's a lot more middle ground between, you know, if we want to look at how this project started with these 2 sides forming, I'm realizing that it's not as 2-sided as it has always appeared. It's very middle and neutral, and it's coming from a place of people wanting to also learn more about the watershed and being really curious about it, because they all use it in different ways. And some major themes that have come up are history and kind of, you know, what kinds of history do we want to focus on in Camden, whether that be in the 1900s and onward or further back than that, and how to balance that want to preserve. You know, we had a meeting today with someone, and preserve has come up a lot. And so what does that mean for us? And I think that's something that the committee can work through, and also, you know, care for the tourists of Camden that come in, and what do we want for those people that offer a big plus for the town, and then also balancing the views of people who live in this community with expert opinion. And so taking, you know, anecdotal stories from residents and then combining that with what we know with scientific, you know, fact. Is this feasible? Can we do this? How would we want to do this? I think a lot of folks, probably all of them, are like, I asked, what do you think will happen with the watershed project, and what do you hope will happen with the watershed project? And people are like, I just don't know what to think about. I can't visualize what it really looks like. And so I think that theme came out. And so visuals are really important for people to kind of see what's happening. It's not so much that they're scared of change, it's more so they don't know what that change would look like. That was a big theme that kind of came out. And another thing too, I think what's been interesting is that people who might have disagreeing opinions are neighbors. You know, I've found that a lot, is that we walk our dogs together and we're like, our kids are best friends, but we completely disagree on certain aspects of this issue. And so figuring out ways to bring those people together, you know, more so than just neighbors, but with their viewpoints and their opinions of what they want for the future of Camden, was something that they wanted to see. And also considering looking not 10 years, but longer term in the future. A lot of people express the need for that they want their kids to be in a place, you know, they're thinking longer term. And so wanting the committee to think also longer term, and what ways can we, you know, in what ways can we do that for the Camden residents? I think it was kind of, a lot of people were very selfless. They're like, I just care about the community. And, Lincolnville and Hope people were like, we're watching what's going on and we're also impacted with what's going on. And we want to say some things. And they have, the Harbor Committee is also another group that is important to bring in. There's a lot of different groups of people in Camden that I think that are really interesting and fascinating that the committee would benefit from bringing in, if you put people in different groups. So that's kind of what I got. And I could go down like hours of talking about all of the characters that I've gotten to talk to. Does anybody?
You want to explain sort of what your end goal is,
Oh.
or like what we can show them?
Yeah. So right now I'm in the process of writing up all of my interview notes. I take handwritten notes in a journal, as you guys know, and so I have to type them in, and that will be given to you guys in some way to know kind of a snapshot of what Camden residents are thinking. I've also taken portrait photos of everyone to a lot of people's chagrin, and that hopefully be a website soon. That's the goal, so that people can see, oh, that person thinks this, I didn't thought about that, or this person thinks this, and I agree with them, but I hated them before this, and like stuff like that. So maybe community coming together, and then a coffee table book. Coffee table book would be a really cool.
I'm still thinking you'll connect people in different ways.
Yeah, so also the connections too, like this is the committee and people on the committee are involved with these different organizations in Camden and they know these people. And so kind of having a web of faces.
Does
So
anybody have any opposition to being labeled or connected to with what they said?
some people express who maybe were part of certain groups that are neutral on this issue, said that they're wearing their individual hats. That's how or some people declined to be interviewed because of the project. So, yeah.
Cool. Did anything come out of your discussions with people about our committee and recommendations for us?
Yeah, people were pumped, and I'm not just saying that because I'm pumped, but people were very excited. I don't think many people, some had reservations in the sense of, I don't know what the outcome of this committee will be, but I think most, if not all, people were very grateful that this project was kind of taking a breath. Like the community is like a breath from everything going really fast paced and moving on this project to now, like, we're really taking in all the information. And recommendations wise, they are curious about what those will look like, as I'm sure a lot of people are. And they're looking forward to like the outcome and just learning more. And I think that's an important aspect of the committee too, is how can we learn and then teach the public about this? That's going to be a big charge, but people were very optimistic about the committee, which was good.
There's some good notes in the packet if you have a minute, not right in a second, but under the non-MRCAC members, the first one says people are happy that this committee was formed, that members seem open-minded. So I do think that is huge kudos to who you all are and how you show up in this room. So thank you. And then there's a few other recommendations in there that I thought were great and sort of where we all talked about where you guys want to head. So
I can't wait.
consistent.
Can't wait to see the notes.
Like 100 pages long.
Oh, I know. It's really, it tells us that people are really hungry for information and participation and want to learn more and understand the value of the watershed to the town. So I think it's good. So thank you, everyone.
Yeah.
Has everyone done it, by the way?
Yeah.
The one right after the mentioned, the request for community members to be able to ask questions in the public meetings. Did that come up often?
Yeah, so I think
it's
that,
something I think we should talk about.
I think that's a great point. Yes, that came up very often and we should talk about it.
And also the first section on the MRCAC members.
I keep thinking about
Just
it.
our-
That should be our
That's
mascot.
good, the meerkats looking around.
Mascot.
Yeah. Perfect.
I'll make t-shirts.
So my question is, are we gonna go through that at all as a committee, or is there, is there a certain time that we can come together to discuss our committees doing and how if we want to change?
Yeah, I think we can dig into it as much as we want today as well. I think it could kind of flow into our next conversation, but I also think it might be better for next month where we're really gonna dig into our data gap analysis. What did we miss? What do we want to learn and where are we headed? Because then we can take this and help that guide us to where we're headed. So maybe it's a good point to your homework. I always send you homework. Between now and the next meeting, we could, you could all read through at least this top section to think about, you know, what do you guys want? Where do you see this committee going based on what you've learned so far?
I would add to that also, though, not just what we want or whatever, but what do, I'll call them the people out
The
there
people.
want there too.
Yeah.
As far as the comment about being able to ask questions or comments at our meetings and other things. So I think they're not, haven't been involved, or we haven't allowed them to be involved enough in some of our discussions.
Well,
And I-
so learn a little bit more about what they want to know and to learn
Exactly.
if and when the survey ever goes out.
Yeah.
So, but I'm gonna push back on digging more today because we have Mike here.
Yeah.
Right.
So I think we should
Right.
make, you know, so I like the idea of homework, read the notes, come up with ideas, items for discussion, and we'll put that on the next agenda. Yes?
Yeah, can I just say really quick, kudos to Lauren for
Yes.
your professional
Yes.
work on this. It's- You took it on with such professionalism, and it's rare to have this level of depth in a watershed type project, so thank you, I think, from everybody.
Yeah,
It was fun being there.
I'm really excited to read what people say, so.
It was fun being interviewed.
Good.
Well, that's what I think is maybe important about it, is that people probably feel very valued by being able to sit down and have a one-on-one and feel like, I mean, I felt at least personally that like our interview just went as long as naturally felt like it should, and so if people felt that, that probably was a key piece in feeling valued, so.
Yeah, that was a cool, someone told me that they had never talked to anybody about this topic before we talked, and then we talked for like 2 hours or something, and they're like, I can't wait to tell everybody I know about this project. And I was like, if I was the only person I interviewed, I'd be so pumped. So that was cool. Yeah.
All right, awesome.
Sure.
Bina, I'm turning it over to you for the
Perfect.
next agenda item, and
So Mike and I,
hold on,
yeah,
4:34, I'll give you 55 minutes.
all right,
Okay?
hold into it.
All right.
After the Save the Dam and Restore Magenta presentations, I think all of you reached out to me or we chatted immediately after about how there was so much more common ground than you anticipated, and how much you learned from those two presentations, and how you really just wanted to have a conversation about what you learned and what questions you had. And during the Restore conversation, there were a lot of questions that came up that we all decided Mike needed to be in the room. So we wanted to make sure Mike was here today. And some of you sent in some questions to help guide this conversation. And so I sent them along to Mike. So if you want me to just go over those questions, or if you guys wanted to, you know, share your thoughts on how you thought the meetings went, I'm happy to do either way. I think we can start with the questions and have Mike start answering those, and then chime in about how you feel the meetings went. Does that work? Okay.
First,
Do you want me to read them to you?
Let's read them so
Yeah.
everybody has them.
I wrote it. So one of the questions was, are the feasibility studies still accurate, and what updates are needed moving forward?
Yeah, so that's a good question. I think that, and I'd be interested to hear also, whoever submitted that question, if there are particular things that they're concerned about in those studies. I would say the studies as completed are fully, still accurate. The analyses and whatnot that were done there, and the evaluation of the alternatives and things. There's always additional things that can be added to studies like that, if there's particular, focus topics that come out that people want to explore more, but the analyses as they are, as reported in those studies are still fully accurate. The one area you'll find that over time, in a sort of long-term planning project like this, costs of implementing projects, don't ever go down, they go up over time. At some junctures, and typically when you get in, you move from a sort of feasibility study into more of a design phase, and you update cost estimates to go that way. But, one thing, if you were looking for a whole ball of wax, estimate of, what the entirety over 15 years or whatever would cost, periodically you might want to update those.
And that kind of goes into another question we received about is flooding taken into consideration with, with the feasibility study, but also with design options moving forward, and how is climate change going to be taken into consideration with that as well? So I think there was some thought that maybe flooding and climate change, either connected or disjointed, could be taken into consideration more moving forward with interface work.
Yeah, so that's an interesting question. Within the more detailed designs, as in the feasibility study, all of the options were evaluated relative to flooding patterns. Going forward, all the designs need to, function through the types of flows that are the flows in which, fish are trying to swim up past the sites, but also how the sites perform under flooding conditions and their stability and things like that. So there's a broad spectrum of flow conditions that are considered in those detailed designs. Integrating climate change influences on flow is sort of an emerging area in the field. And I would say there's not particularly great guidance that's real specific. We did evaluate, following on some of the work that was been done by the Governor's Climate Council, we did evaluate, some of the trends that have been reported on so far, and those are summarized in the feasibility study. But I think, going into a detailed design phase, there's ways to add escalation on top of flood flows and things like that to think about. Just cover the bases, if you will, relative to potential for flows to get higher over time. And then I think, the other way to just think about is that within the alternatives, some of them provide more buffering against, the uncertainty in future climate versus, more rigid the designs get, the sort of less buffering. Or the more, constructed out of rigid elements, the less buffering there it is against the uncertainty. And the more space that's, provided, I guess, within the river corridor, there's more ability for nature to adapt to, changing climate.
Can I ask
Yeah,
an
please.
extension question to that? Since the predictive science about climate change is in its infancy, in terms of your study, is there, or what value might there be in doing one or two scenarios based on not past flooding, but looking at the kind of things that have happened, for example, in New England? And just saying, if this happened, this happened, this happened within 5 days, that would be a test of, and it could just be two things combining, not just a single event, let's say two events occur within a reasonable short time.
Yeah.
Is that doable?
I think there's ways to develop scenarios, to test some things like that. So that could be something to think about doing.
It's just the unpredictability makes dealing with the flooding issue really tough. Unpredictable.
That's the whole point.
I know.
No, and that was a question we talked about too, was, I think the feasibility study looked at 100-year floods, but like you're saying, should we look at a scenario of a 500-year flood?
Or even something that hasn't been measured in terms of years, but look at the things that have caused real problems.
Right.
The nature of them, how much rain in what period of time.
Yeah.
Just 2 or 3 of them to get some idea. I mean, I was surprised, I don't remember what study it was, but it's 12.6% of the watershed is capable of holding water. And that includes bodies and floodlights.
Well,
That's not very much.
yeah.
What's the likelihood of having something like what happened in Vermont? Like, did
Yeah,
everybody-
that's the big question, right? That's sort of the recent thing, and I think it's interesting, like when you drill into, so the US Geological Survey in Augusta, within the state are, kind of the experts and look to evaluate trends in climate relative to, flow and rivers and things. And, for the really extreme events, it's hard to really say because they're so, they're infrequent, but, you know, more of the intermediate type events, the 2, 5, 10, 25-year type events, which are also not just occurring, you know, in the regular snowmelt period in April or May, but could occur in like a cloudburst in August or, you know, something in July or October. Those are the types of events that have been sort of demonstrated and are accelerating, you know, and more often than not, there's not just like a snow melt, you know, all the year snow melt is melting off in the spring, but it's some superposition combination of, you know, some snow condition with an uncharacteristically timed warm rain, or, you know, it's like the unpredictability. And so that is the sort of demonstrated trend. And, you know, as you saw, you know, like May 1, I understand was a kind of interesting, you know, series of events here in town of like managing infrastructure and things like that, that in a lot of Maine communities, that event really came up and surprised people. And so those are the types of, I think, even though they're not the biggest floods, you know, they're not the 100-year or the 500-year, they are sort of what are the nuisance types of things that, you know, make people move, you know, and like start operating dams and things like that, and maybe aren't quite prepared to like take care of, you know.
But I think it would be, I think it would be interesting for people to understand the perspective. I know it's hard because it's easy to model the past. It's not easy to model the future because we don't know how fast the acceleration is basically. So,
Yeah.
but bringing back home using, you know, other flood events like Vermont or other places in California or whatever, to understand what we're talking about when we talk about flooding.
Yeah, and I think
It's a complicated issue.
yeah, and you know, the sort of the time, you know, the time variable nature of it, you know, sort of you know, sort of standard practice in the types of studies that we did for the feasibility study, you know, looking at levels during flood events and things like that. You do that simulation, you know, with basically the same flow throughout the river. But it's that time variable piece with these more nuisance type events that can also be those are the types of things, you know, so if you're gonna, you know, recognizing some of the stormwater concerns, you know, in Camden and whatnot, if you're gonna add some additional analyses and thinking about the way climate change, you know, can affect day to day, you know, that's probably something to think about adding to the holistic plan.
I'm talking about debris, so I know that's an increasing issue now that we have more water flowing. And during the May storm, there was tons of like boats and all the stuff stuck at the upper dams on the kind of the lake track.
Yeah.
And so I was wondering if debris could be looked at as well in these models. Is that something that's doable, or I mean, it's
Yeah, there are certainly ways to, evaluate, you know, I mean, you can't ever predict exactly what's gonna happen in an event like that, but you know, you can start in particular areas that are, you know, or features that are present within the river that are likely to raft up, you know, things you can.
The equipment underneath the Bagel Cafe is one that you. put in your
Yeah, for
report.
example.
The bridge on Route 1. is
Yeah,
another
Main Street
key one.
Bridge, yeah, and it's that had some debris on it in May.
I have a question, and really maybe more for Audra, but who is responsible for removing debris from the river, like down trees, et cetera?
It depends where it is on the river.
Okay, because
Yeah.
I mean, there was a very large tree in the river up by the McGonagall Market for probably 2 months. And I think it eventually came down the river, you know, and nobody took care of it. And I know it was reported to Dave St. Brent many times. So I don't know if he was responsible for that or not.
Probably not. It was probably a DOT if it got trapped on the 105
Right.
bridge, just like with the Route 1.
Right.
There were logs that were stuck on the Route 1 bridge on the upstream side of it, and DOT came and removed them.
So it's not unilaterally the town's responsibility to do it.
No.
But I think even debris is tricky because it's. If you had a tree go across the river at certain locations, it could actually provide additional buffer and actually additional hydraulic events to try to. It could actually help mitigate flash flooding type events. But it could also, in the wrong spot, it can also, I mean, I think the issue that was happening in the Dunkirk was you had debris raising the whole impoundment elevation.
Yeah, and that's the thing, like flood, what is flood to you? What's a flood to you, there's varying definition. If we went around, we would probably capture all of, the essence of what flooding is, but it probably wouldn't be the same to every single person. Public works person, it's, when the pump station is flooded and they have to, mobilize and, pump out the pump station. Or the the pump station to get the sanitary lines going across the river, that's a flood. And, I'm growing vegetables on the back of my property and that, if it's inundated, that's a flood to me. And other FEMA, that's a different definition, there's sort of variable, but I think it's certainly within, if there was interest to, like you say, predicting the future is hard, but you can develop scenarios that kind of bracket, the range of possibilities. And I think that's something that,
It's something we're gonna dig into more, right, flooding?
Yeah, that's
Because I think
something
there's
that-
a lot of questions.
we've all talked about, like, we should figure out what is a flood event to this committee, and not just what is flooding, but what is a flood event in Camden? And once we understand what that is or agree on what that is, then why does that matter? And what are we, mitigating for, preparing for?
Well, it's particularly important since one of the things we said we want to do is reduce flooding.
Right. So what does that mean when we say that?
If we're gonna reduce it, we gotta know what it is.
Yeah.
Right.
I need to step out for just a moment. I have some emergency happening in there. I'll be right back. Okay.
yeah, I think, just thinking about the definition, like it is not a single thing, in that diet. It's word, I think it's really good exercise to explore, like, what is that, maybe, significant for the people.
And I think the answer, it might be good to come up with catastrophic flooding or like 5 different. Yeah, I think there's definitely, because I can tell you, there's a flooding, a Seabright Dam failure is a very different type of flooding event than what happened May 1st. Right. Sure.
Yeah, you have 2 high hazard dams at the upper end of your watershed.
Right. But I can't even tell if those, I can't. Even those failing, I can't tell how much permutations what the permutations would look like downstream.
I think flooding is a really good conversation that we should continue having.
Are there certain things that our committee, I know we get stuck sometimes on small things, and I think. For me, there's 2 things. One is the operation of valve assemblies on dams. And I think come to realize, maybe this is for Dave's conversation, how little they can affect the flow over the dam during major water events. And it seems like there's opportunities perhaps for drawdown, but even that drawdown is to make a significant impact to some of these impoundments, it's like an 8-day drawdown or a week drawdown before it actually really affects capacity. I would imagine during the event, whether the valve's open or closed, it's nothing, doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Or it's be so minimal to the percentage flow.
Yeah, and there's certainly ways to look at that a little bit more in detail as well, and sort of that time-based analysis, but and looking at some of the, questions that were asked that, the last time I was, with you folks virtually, within the operating rules of the lake right now, there's very little storage.
Yeah.
That can be generated, and it does take, although it is a big surface area, and, the gate has to be letting out more flow, through the dam than is coming in from upstream, and so it's not high capacity to begin with, and so then to take additional blowout does take a long time to draw down, so. I think it would be some fair, it's a big lake. I didn't go too far down the rabbit hole of like really looking at what that would mean to operate the lake for flood storage, but it would be a dramatic departure from the way it's operated now.
It'd be like a 10-foot drawdown kind of thing.
Really big.
Yeah.
Fluctuations relative to the way it's managed.
And then same question, I think, on stormwater. Because like I've always thought, I was always thinking it would be worth it to look at stormwater, but perhaps the stormwater. As far as the percentage of the watershed might be so small that it might not really affect. Your flows during the rain events, other than it comes fast.
Yeah.
The issue is that we have now those rain events that come very fast.
Yeah.
That didn't used to be the case.
I mean, stormwater,
Yeah.
your stormwater system is efficient at moving. Water into the river, as opposed to a lot of your watershed that. There's some delay associated with.
Culverts need to be extended. I think.
So I was gonna say, just as an extreme, should we look at what would happen if one of the dams, the high hazard dams did fail? I mean, there's the ultimate extreme.
Well, there was some dam breach modeling that you did.
Yeah.
We looked at the two downs, because those aren't inspected.
Which two, sorry?
Not
The two lower or the,
Yeah.
not the lowest two.
But I'm thinking of the east, west and the
Right.
Seabright. If one of those were breached or,
Yeah,
that to me would be an extreme and how would we deal with that? I mean, there's the ultimate extreme. And is it something that we should consider changing the gates, sluice gates or whatever on those three dams to help with flooding?
yeah, there's a few things that I'll offer. First, the high hazard dams, because our high hazard dams are required to be inspected every 3 years, so the town does have a program and those are inspected every 3 years. And do have an emergency action plan associated with them that was prepared several years ago. And it varies when you go from dam to dam. Sometimes those emergency action plans will be drawn based on some dam break modeling, actual modeling that, of the type that we did at Knox and Knowlton. The ones here were not necessarily based on modeling. It had more to do with looking at the inundation extents of the FEMA mapping. So if it was an area that you wanted to drill into more, as a sort of supplement to what's in the emergency action plan, that is something that could be analyzed in more detail. And then I just want to clarify the reason that we did do the dam break modeling for the town, the dam, private owned dams in town is, even though they're regarded as low hazard, they're not frequently inspected or maintained, and given the proximity to the downtown area, that's sort of the basis for why this was looked at in detail. And then as far as the upper sites, it's a good segue to, part of the NIFWIF grant and what we had scoped for this time. We looked at those sites and kind of narrowed down the sort of range of options relative to solutions there. But there's a process as part of this NIFWIF grant, to then really try to drill down more at those sites to come up with the option at those sites. And so there is some exploration plan at those sites, and within that, there could be some additional thinking about, are there opportunities to add, flood conveyance through those dams.
Courtney.
This is sorry.
Yeah. There's no one else in the room. Go ahead.
Well, actually, I'm just wondering if you could talk a little bit more about the NIFWIF or the piece of the NIFWIF grant that you're doing. as interflow and what exactly you're looking at. We haven't really had much of a conversation with it. I don't know if you want to this later.
So, no, I like this thought. From a process perspective, let's finish those questions and then.
I think
or-
it's
or
okay.
It's okay.
Yeah, because we
Okay.
don't have that many more questions, and I think
Okay,
that the point of this was to incite this conversation, so.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, I think in actuality, that's one of the questions.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I can talk through from top to bottom, you know, you're probably familiar with, you know, in the NIFWIP grant, there's 10 or 12 line items. Organized around those sites and then a couple of additional tasks in there. So, you know, starting from the upstream end and kind of making the tour down through the dam sites. So at the lake outlet between the east and west dams. What was planned there is just what I just mentioned is didn't quite get to, you know, the finish line in the feasibility study with finding the perfect solution at those sites. And so what was planned, there was some additional analysis of options, you know, involving also, you know, dialogue, collaboration with the town and others, stakeholders to come up with the best option there and then advance those projects to what we'll call like a concept design or 50% design.
When you say that, are we talking about fish passage? Are we talking about control of water levels? What?
It was really, you know, kind of focused on fish passage, as well at the same time maintaining water levels. I think there's room for defining, you know, all of the options that we looked at specifically there. But, it wasn't specifically related to flood control, but I think in thinking about, you know, fish passage options and things like that, there's probably some room to also add some thoughts around that. And certainly evaluate what the existing needs are. So, and then that's the same situation at the Seabright. That was another site where the, you know, it's concluded that the dam is staying and then the pond levels are important to maintain. There's a couple of pretty good options there for fish passage, and so within this current NIFWIP grant, the idea was again to try and narrow that down a little bit more and then advance that to a 50% design of a preferred option. So then moving down the river at the Powder Mill Dam, there's really not an option to build a fish ladder there. So it was, you know, essentially assumed to, you know, the result of the feasibility study where, you know, the best option would be a dam project there or, you know, some variation thereof. So the NIFWIP grant has funds in there to take that project from where it is in the feasibility study up through final design.
Can you just remind us what the hydraulic elevation change of the Powder Mill Dam is?
There's, you know, it's in the order of 6 feet kind of thing. You know, it varies with the amount of flow, but
Yeah.
and there is some ledge under the dam and things like that, you know. So there will always be some hydraulic there for sure. It's yeah, on that order.
Okay.
For timing for that, because you said it could be taken to the final design for Powder Mill based on what was found in the feasibility study. What is that timeline to take it to final design?
You know, it's a modestly sized project, so I think, you know, we could revisit the sort of the work plan, you know, but so presently I think we've got all of the field data collection that we would need at that site. And so within, you know, once we were at the point of like, okay, let's proceed with the design, it's, you know, 6 months or something like that.
Yeah, I think one thing that I've heard from some committee members, but it would be nice to have, you know, dam by dam, what, you know, are we looking for 50% design and what's the timeline there and what field work's being done this year and what can we expect to see this year versus next year versus whatever. So
Yeah,
I think we talked about maybe doing a more structured meeting
yeah.
around that, so.
Yeah, and I'll just in that field work, I'll just step back up to the upper dams. We are, so Tim is deploying some water level loggers on those 2 upper dams. And then we're gonna also deploy some water level loggers that supplement the data that he's collecting for our own design applications. And then we have some individual bathymetric surveys and things planned there for this fall. And then launch into the more technical analyses, you know, after that. The powder mill site, we basically have the data that we need for that site, so it's when the time is right to proceed with that, we will proceed with the exact design. So then coming down the river, I guess the next dam, we'll go through all the dams, and then we'll cycle back up, talk about a couple of other things. So the next dam on down the line would be the Knowlton Street Dam. And that dam, so the result of the feasibility study was, the best fit for all of the objectives was a dam removal project there. And then at the, one of the outcomes of the feasibility study, there were a couple of sites that were then taken to a concept level, design level, that being one of them. And so what was assumed in the quick grant was then to take that design from the 50% level to final design. In terms of field data collection at that site, we do have some additional field exercises this fall planned that would entail some additional sampling of the sediments, and also additional probing of the sediments. So really try and dial in the depths of thicknesses of the sediment and locations of the historical river channel. And things like that. So we have that plan for this fall.
How do you locate the historical riverbed?
Yeah.
Do you do like solar depth? How does? I find this fascinating, and I just want to go and do it. That's why I apply to even.
Yeah, get in the
Yeah,
field
there's-
with them again.
Yeah.
There's a pretty fun cartoon in the feasibility study that my colleague put together that showed, it's referred to as depth of refusal probing. And so we would either be walking around on the accumulated sediment or in a boat, a canoe or something like that. And then we have some sort of custom made probe rods that we probe down, you know, we measure the depth to the top of the sediment surface, and then the accumulated sediments are invariably much softer and loosely accumulated than the historical soils. And so we mark how deep the sediment surface is, and then we probe down, push the rods down through there. And you can pick up, you know, you can hear if it's gravel, or you can feel if it's sand, or if it's just like a really firm historical floodplain surface or things like that. And so we make, you know, we then record, you know, that depth and thickness measurement. And then if you distribute enough of those probing all throughout, you can, you know, start to, you know, you find where those, you know, the elevations are deepest, you know, and yeah, it's really hard to like say, okay, in the historical river channel, this is definitely a pool, or this is a ripple, or it's exactly here, but you know, to develop an idea of the general location, and then combining that with just interpreting, you know, the shape of the overall river.
I want
Yeah, probably sounds more glamorous than it really is.
Trust me, I know glamorous. I worked with Tim and Luke to put data loggers a couple of weeks back, so I'm not that much.
Like the Knowlton Street Dam has the most sediment.
By far,
By
yeah, a
far.
couple of orders of magnitude more sediment in the Knowlton Street impoundment than any of the others. And just to that also, I would just say the Knowlton Street impoundment is the longest, and it's about 3/4 of a mile. Offers the most opportunity for also collateral benefits to, you know, water quality. There's, you know, this pile of legacy sediment that's in the impoundment that would be managed as part of a project there. Water temperature, things like that, you know, and then people are talking about like breeding mosquitoes and things like that, you know, that sort of shallow impoundments, you know.
Do you know how wide it is now?
You know, it varies, you know, in the lower portion of the impoundment there, just upstream of the dam, it's probably, you know, 150, maybe 200 feet wide, and then, you know,
It's quite
it
wide.
actually narrows up as you're going around, you know, by where the sewage treatment plant is, and then when you get around the corner, it kind of widens out again. You know, there's a little bit of variability.
why exactly do you look at the original location of the river? Is it because we think if we remove the dam, the river will start flowing that way? And are you also looking at all the other dams, like the Montgomery Dam, and how there's belief that the river flowed a different way around more recovered bark? So I guess that's two questions, like why do you look at it, and are you looking at it? for other
Yeah.
dams?
Yeah, so I think that there are a couple of reasons. So let's just take the Knowlton Street Dam site or Knox Mill, for example. You know, we're looking for, rivers tend to migrate towards the lowest point, in the valley. So if you put it on the edge of the valley, it's over time gonna probably, unless you really like concrete it in place over there, it's gonna eventually find its way back and point in the valley. That's for planning and restoration projects, that you want to have resilience, over the long term, that's the most opportune place to put it. Depending on the type of river, if it's a gravel bed river, you can make some assumptions about those gravel still being down there, and so in terms of economics of restoring a river channel, a lot cheaper to just utilize the gravels that were there, 200 years ago than building a river channel in a different location there and bring all that and things like that. So it's kind of a combination of like, it's the best place for the river to be and then, embracing the goal for resiliency of the river once the project's done. And it really varies, the Nolan Street site is actually quite interesting for a couple of reasons. As I mentioned, it's the longest impoundment and has the most opportunity for, collateral restoration, habitat restoration, things like that. And that's due to the fact really is because the dam itself is located on what you refer to as a nick point in the overall watershed. The slope of the river really changes in character right at that point. So, and it's due to the bedrock and things that are exposed around Knowlton Street and Knox Mill and whatnot that's the resistant hard point that the watershed had migrated down to. And upstream of that it's quite a bit flatter, and then from there down to the hard steeper. So that just so happens that places like that are great places to build dams historically. But that is what creates that market character of that site versus one downstream.
So does that mean you're not looking at the other dam sites for like the previous location?
Yeah, no, we would look at so that and that Knox Mill site, when we did the study in 2020, the field work there is really clear, that was drawn down. There's very little sediment in that impoundment. And you can clearly see the bedrock structure and things like that through that impoundment. And so didn't really have to probe around too much. It was just right in front of us when the impoundment was drawn down. The Montgomery site is quite complex in terms of interpretation of historical, probably multiple locations of channels historically. Probably one of the conclusions you could make though is like where it runs right now is probably within the domain of where historical rivers are running, but over the top of a bedrock outcrop is not the location where rivers migrate to. So that's about the conclusion you make there. But that site also then punctuates the modern realities of in always the best location to put a river back is the historical alignment if all of the surrounding landscape sort of supports that. And so sometimes the temporary realities require you to design projects that can kind of overcome historical changes. It may not be possible to get back to the historical alignment in all cases.
Like between the Knox and Knowlton Street Dam where they are now, and if the two dams are removed, what is the elevation there? And is there going to need to be a fish ladder to get fish up that distance?
Yeah, that's a good question, because it is there is also at the upstream end of the Knox impoundment, there was another historical dam, that when the pond is full, it's below the water, but when the pond is draining down, there's just a small there, which, as part of that project, we designed to be managed, really just a standard.
Right.
That's within the range of, it's a deeper reach, but squarely within the range of, hydraulic conditions that, under the right conditions.
The right conditions.
Yeah. That's also one thing that you run into historically, because fish populations were so abundant. If you didn't have to have fish all the time when they migrate, you could take a month off. And pack the rest of the fish, but, or you might miss a year or something like that. A lot of these sites that, on coastal rivers, along the Atlantic coast, may have not had perfect fish passage conditions, every single year, the entire time period when fish were ready to migrate, but there were enough opportunities historically to enable enough fish to pass to sustain very viable populations. So, that's something to keep in mind when, sometimes we come up and look at like a bedrock outcrop and whatnot, and like, there's no way, but often with the right conditions, and it's not a perpetual constant all the time thing, but the opportunistic situations occur.
By right conditions, you're talking about amount of water in the river.
Yeah,
Basically, and to make the right conditions, you might have to release water from the lake.
yeah, or,
Fish are migrating.
yeah, within the range of flow variability that would occur during something this one.
Right.
So I think,
Excuse me, one more thing. Do you know of other projects where that has been brought into consideration, where upstream, where there's a lake or something, and you release water from that to allow fish passage of alewives or other types of fish?
Usually, there is a desire to have passage conditions be passive. So where you don't require operation, especially if there is active operation through just to that particular dam. It's often not things all the way down through. It's more common to elevate those fish, push fish out. In some systems.
Okay.
Generally try to avoid that.
Tyler,
yeah, I just had along the same lines, two things. The first one was, is there as far as recommendations go, when you start to look at this fish passage, if you're only recommending putting fish passage up one dam or two dams, as you progress up the river, is there a certain point where if you can only get two dams, it's not worth to do any? Or do you kind of have to get fish passage all the way up to the river? Do you have to get it all the way up the lake? I would imagine that the river would have standing cold enough water for probably all types of fish. I don't know if I guess that's the question is, it would seem silly to spend money on one dam fish passage if it just brings up fish that
can't go any
can't
further.
go any further or can't spawn in those conditions or,
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think and I guess I'll answer it a couple different ways. There's certainly, as you go further up in the river corridor up towards the dams, you get into very nice naturalized areas of the river, and there's brook trout, there's brook trout in there, both stock and resident, and people enjoy spending time in those naturalized reaches fishing for. And I think water temperature is an issue in the McGunskook. It gets pretty warm in the late summer and fall.
in the river or the lake or both?
In the river, I would imagine the lake itself is quite a thermal source for the lower river, but I think, so in and of itself, there's opportunities for resident fish, and even, sport fish, like, so I think there would be impetus for, like a site like the Knowlton Street site, if you were able to effectively double the length of naturalized river corridor between downtown and the lake, that in and of itself, even if you didn't have sea run fish, may be a real viable candidate for river restoration. And you might, probably not to the same extent, but probably also get some pretty decent, funding from some alternate sources. And that also has the collateral benefit, water quality, there's a whole range of potential benefits. But I do think, program wise, the biggest pull for you folks for external funding is opening up passage to McCunn Lake, because that's a real prize. Is it pulls in the ability, Penobscot Bay is designated critical habitat for Atlantic salmon, which are listed on an Endangered Species Act, and part of critical designated habitat are the co-evolved sea run fish species. So river herring, are those. And so, and then combined with, there's so much availability of, combined with Endangered Species Act related funding, and then climate resilience is like, those are the biggest buckets right now in terms of funding. For the other sites, site to site, there's sort of various trade-offs that, if it's not an expensive site, but gives you some of those collateral benefits, you could do those.
And it's a question we do have, sorry to interrupt, that's a question we do have out to Matt Bernier, who I'll let you guys, I'll talk about our next meeting date, but he has confirmed we have a community conversation coming, but that's one question that I have asked him in a few different ways of, can we do a phased approach? Can we do dam by dam? Can we figure out, what makes the most sense for this town, this community in terms of river restoration, or is it just about fish? And
Right.
I think keep that question.
Yeah, it seems like, my gut feel is just doing fish passage on the Montgomery. I don't think it's successful by itself. Yeah, that's my gut feel.
Yeah.
And then I think along the same line, I think, do you see cases where you create fish passage around a hydraulic structure that may not be optimum, may not be that 5%, maybe steeper, or maybe still allow some fish passage? I guess as far as fish species go, I'm sure it's different for each one, but how does that drop off as far as, I think we all know that the elvers, they don't care at all.
Yeah.
I think we've established that, but I think there's definitely other species that I would imagine as you get out of the optimum. Because I know, that was one issue always with Montgomery Dam is trying to figure out how to get
Slope.
get an appropriate run out on that.
Yeah, so, it comes around to, so there's, I think of the 12 native sea run fish species, I think there were, 5 or 6 that were potential candidates in the Council book, and, they have varying abilities to, respond to stressful hydraulic conditions. We often use river herring because they're on sort of the weaker end of the spectrum. The Atlantic salmon being, sort of the decathletes of the community, as elvers don't care, and they all have their eccentricities.
Okay.
And one thing we are.
Second t-shirt, Elvers don't care.
Yeah. We're also, we've been chatting with this guy, Nathan Curie, who is a fish biologist and also sort of a river ecologist guy. He's very smart. And I think what we'd love to do is sort of overlay his information with, the feasibility study information and make sure that, and he's worked with a lot of communities in New Hampshire, mostly on this type of project. And he would love to talk to us about lessons learned and what to expect. So maybe you won't see fish tomorrow if we did this project, right? But what you can really expect and what sort of fish could and should be seen here in a 5 to 10 year timeframe, and the fluctuations of expectations and sort of what's worked in the past. And so,
Yeah, I think that, you know, with, if it does, you know, come to pass that you're able to establish a, you know, a restoration program that enables, you know, alewives in particular to get up to McGuntacook Lake, you know, the state agencies will come in and, you know, as part of that restoration strategy, you know, DMR will probably initiate a planting program, or they'll plant, you know, juvenile alewives in McGuntacook Lake, which
Yeah.
start population, and that's a practice that they've done repetitively across, you know, that,
Mhm.
you know, explodes with real, you know, effective strategy. I was thinking maybe I should step back down the rest of the sites.
Yeah, sorry.
Yes,
that's kind of.
but I also want to make, there's a few people who have asked questions. I want to make sure that you guys have voice your questions, so but continue and we'll make sure everybody has it.
Sure.
Thank you, Mike.
Well, we talked about Knoxville a little bit, in the feasibility study. Again, just the way it's, wedged in there, between the building and the bedrock, there really wasn't a way to fit a technical fish passage in there. We didn't think that wouldn't also increase the flood levels above what they are now, and so, what the feasibility study concluded was, you know, a dam removal at that site. And that was another site that we then did take forward to a conceptual design, the same as the street. So what was, you know, what is in the NIFWIF grant is then to take that to final design from where it sits right now, which is a concept design. And then moving down the river, so then you come to Montgomery Dam, and you know, just recognizing what the NIFWIF grant does include is to take a project at Montgomery Dam, you know, to final design, but recognizing, you know, the various debates and things like that. You know, that's the one that will need to follow the stakeholder process to get to the point of, you know, understanding what this like alternative is. It did assume, you know, also the interface and interaction with the seawall and harbor park on that. So those are like the focused dam sites. And then I'll just mention, there's two other sort of side studies that were also included. The first is, we'll refer to as sort of the Rawson Avenue Tannery area. There's three things there. First, it was to, you know, kind of dust off what's been done at the tannery and just look a little bit more at what opportunities there may be for restoration along the tannery property. Thinking a little bit more about some of the solid waste that's along the riverbank and things like that. So that's part of that. And then the second part of that is that there's a small tributary that comes in, crosses Rawson. There's a pump station there by the power lines, and that road crossing floods. The pump station is right there, partially due to the backwater from the Knowlton Street, you know, elevates the water level and things like that. But then there's some real stormwater issues in that small tributary that are causing some stream instability up through there, that create a lot of sediment, a lot of erosion during significant rain events. And so that task also does what we'll refer to as a geomorphic assessment of that small tributary, looking at the sources of what's creating all that erosion and the sediment delivery, you know, that ultimately works its way down into Knowlton Street. And then looking at that road crossing at Rawson Avenue next to the pump station. And so, and then there's just a small portion of that is also just kind of reviewing what's being done for the footbridge. So that task order is kind of a bundle of those three, you know.
Wait, hold on a second. You've asked many questions. I want to make sure that the rest of the committee does too.
There was a specific one about the bank.
Go ahead.
Okay.
But I
This tributary you're talking about, is that west or east of Rawson Avenue?
It's west of Rawson, yeah.
Right, so it comes in opposite of Tannery Park there. So,
Yeah, that's right. And some of the stormwater is related. There's a more recent development there that has some stormwater that comes into some detention ponds and then enters the stream. I forget the name of the road that's at the head of that, but yeah, I should look it up, but
Cobb Road.
It's gotta be Cobb or Thomas.
I think it's Thomas. Yeah, Thomas, like this tributary, region I'm thinking about is at Thomas. There's some stormwater that comes down Thomas and gets channeled into the system, goes into the tributary, and then a little bit further down, it picks up additional stormwater off that small development. And that really escalates sort of the erosion downstream of that point. So, you know, that geomorphic assessment I'm referring to is, you know, an initial, you know, we'll do a geomorphic survey up through there and look at those sources of erosion and develop some recommendations, and ideas of opportunities to try and address these issues.
More questions, Courtney?
Just a general question though, are you, I don't know, insert too soon?
Go ahead.
Okay, it was just more about timing and timelines of when your assessments will be completed, because we have the potential vote coming up in November 2024 for the town and Mount Desiree Dam, and potentially other dams. I'm not sure exactly what that will entail. Yeah, so do you have a timeline? Do you know when you'll have assessments completed-ish? And within that, I think people are, like Lauren said, really interested in what the designs might look like for Montgomery. And would those potentially be ready before that vote in November 2024? Are you going to be looking or creating design options for that even? Or just deciding on?
Yeah, so I would say in general, you know, we're starting on the assessment work now. But that, you know, that geomorphic assessment that I referred to is going to, field work will be done this fall, and then the technical portions of that will be, you know, through the winter. Yeah, all the field work we're trying to get done this fall, but timing it kind of when we start coming off the trees is maybe a little easier. And then site to site, you know, it sort of depends a little bit about how resolved everybody is about what to do with that site. You know, we don't want to launch into a detailed design phase if there's still significant debate about what may happen. And if we don't utilize the funding and then have to go back, you know, and do it over. So with the Montgomery site, you know, I think that's an area where there's some planning to do as to how to proceed between the stakeholder process and developing some additional both ideas of what that site design might be, and then developing that into graphical content, you know, that people can respond to and things. So I guess I can't tell you exactly, you know, I can't answer exactly, you know, the question on Montgomery because it's so dependent on the stakeholder process.
But I do think, just so that you know, we are working in tandem with, the whole point is that FE and Interfluve work really closely together through this process so that, you know, as we're drafting whatever we might be able to get on a ballot, you know, we need to think about that really in July. We should have something figured out for what will be on the ballot. And so we'll make sure that over the next few months, we know what questions we want answered. And I think a design is a really big question that we want answered. So we'll work with Mike to figure out how we can get some design options before that.
That'd be great. It's a lot of chicken and egg.
Totally, exactly.
Design options just for the Montgomery Dam or the other two as well?
Well, that's yeah.
In other words, are we aiming for the same timetable for Norton Street and Knox Mill for the design?
Yeah, I think on the Knowlton Street and Knox Mill, there has been, and Montgomery, as you know, there's been some path work on, you know, design concepts, you know, sort of bracketing a range of options there. But at Knowlton Street, Knox Mill, there was also some graphical renderings developed as part of the feasibility study. And I think on those sites, you know, we're ready to proceed with the design at any time if it's, you know, if if it's such that everybody, is ready to proceed with us.
Well, I think
designing it.
there's some stakeholder issues around both of those dams. Not like Montgomery.
Yeah.
But those stakeholder issues aren't townwide.
I'll give you a stakeholder update on that when next.
That's our next agenda.
Yeah, I would just summarize that up in a bow, like, recognizing the stakeholder, when the stakeholder process is to the point to proceed.
Yeah.
And then there's the last. One more notable task order, and then just 2 line items I'll mention. So the other one is to look at the reach around Washington Street and the Brewster Building, and some of that, as you referred to, there's those, sort of relic structures. And I understand the water wheel is actually more of a modern contraption in there, but that all, the real issue there is public safety building is, within the floodway and things like that, and just doing everything that makes sense to do whatever is possible to, reduce obstructions,
Pretty exciting under that building. When it's a heavy rain.
Yeah, I bet, yeah.
Thing of the public safety building cannot be the public safety building when it's flooding.
Oh my God.
It's just mind boggling.
So, and that also, that task also involves, kind of taking a look at what's, being discussed for the Main Street Bridge. Because it's like a core, and there's some stormwater elements with that as well. So Washington, the Main Street, we'll just look at that. And then lastly, there's another task order that we'll have a sub-consultant be able to, kind of look at the historical perspective across all of the sites, to supplement what we had already done and, work with the library and whatnot, to kind of come up with an overall assessment of the historical resources relative to implementing these projects. And then the last piece, we have also tasks in there to start the discussion on permitting of the projects. So that's the entirety, sorry for the long-winded answer, but that's the entirety of the NIPWIP grant.
Just one quick question, is there a sense whether the flooding and safety building is because of stormwater or the 2 dams? Do you have a sense as to what is causing that?
Yeah, the public safety building and the issues around Washington Street are really outside the influence of any of the dams. They're influenced by everything. Maybe you could, I guess, technically, characterize, the historical water structures beneath the Brewster Building as another dam site, but it's just really eye-opening, when you're there and you see how small of a space the whole watershed squeezes down into beneath that building. And then it's also at a point where the landscape really dips. And so that whole combination of factors, I think, is what leads to that. But it is not directly in the influence of any of the dams.
Yeah, I had a question, and maybe on this one is related, so we just point it out, but from the 2 presentations that we watched, I was really sort of surprised to find that there was like a pretty common middle ground on this, like idea that maybe some alterations in fish passage on Montgomery was like an agreeable idea for both sides. But from the perspective of Interfluve, is that even really a viable option in terms of the other things like climate resiliency and flood management? I mean, if that's like, if it's a place we could really go and know that lots of parties felt satisfied with that, that's really cool. But it does, I mean, does it actually answer all of the other issues on the table?
Yeah, a great question. I think that, I would say, at the one end of the spectrum, and we did look at quite too long of a list of alternatives in the Montgomery Dam feasibility study. But all the way from doing, nothing, all the way down to, removing the dam and so at the do nothing end of things, including, if including not installing fish passage, you kind of run sideways with some of those objectives that are established, so You might take care of just like the stability of the infrastructure, but sort of the resiliency and the fish passage and that type of things aren't really getting addressed. And then at the other end of the spectrum, you're probably addressing all of those things, but it represents the greatest change, certainly for folks to think about. The options that retain Montgomery Dam at the existing height, your resiliency things kind of drop off. But you could, and the challenge in getting fish passage is greatest and things like that. And then when you start to move more towards the middle ground, like maybe the spillway's lower, by several feet, you start to pick up a little bit of the resiliency benefit, makes the fish passage task easier and whatnot. And so, the more you can move, down the gradient and pick up those additional objectives, you're both gonna draw more funding and, you're gonna probably find more middle ground.
Just a quick follow-up to that, I'm sorry. And maybe Courtney can correct me if I'm saying this wrong, but it sounded like Restore McGonagall thought that removing the dam entirely would then lead to the river taking sort of a more natural turn into Harbor Park that would potentially look like a pretty significant alteration to the park. And so that seemed like a reason to maybe not do that. Do you have thoughts on how that would look? And I can see how people might be pro removing the dam, but then if they hear the part of like, it also means no park. How that can be answered. That's not what we're advocating for, but that's an option.
Right, yeah, okay, yeah. Okay, so
They're open
they
to.
show it as one option.
Gotcha, okay.
But they clearly, I remember the presentation kind of the same question. That's not what they're advocating, that they're not asking to.
Yeah, no, and I didn't think that they were advocating for that. I'm saying that they were kind of the opposite, actually, that it was not advocating for full removal because of that. Such a significant shift in the way that the river would move. And I guess, if you're sort of like the best way to answer all of the environmental issues on the table is to actually remove the dam, then like, how do we? And I've looked at some.
Do we square off
Yeah, how does that, like, how does the park piece come into it in a way that wouldn't equate to complete removal of the park? Sorry, that was like a very lots of.
Sure.
Lots of
I think I know what you're
questions,
saying,
Affects the seawall. Well, right, I mean, it seems like there's so many things in that side that would be impacted. So it's not just like you remove the dam and then it starts flowing over. I mean, it sounds like a major shift in potentially the way that it flows. And so there's a lot of pieces that.
I think the visual impacts just really, we need to dig into those a lot more. That's
Right, and I think the drawings of what it looked like with dam removal,
Yeah.
to me, it looked beautiful and I could kind of envision it, but when they mentioned that piece, I hadn't really pictured such a significant
Dramatic, yeah.
alteration of the path.
Yeah, so, so one of the options that was looked at was we're talking about, historical courses and things like that, and clearly the lowest spot in bedrock is beneath Harbor Park. And so that would, with a dam removal project that, sort of the path of least resistance to get into the slope range that fish are able to ascend without a fish ladder, that's probably the course over there. But also represents, the most significant change for the current landscape there. And so, if you're gonna go that direction, I don't have any doubt that you couldn't come up with a concept that re-envision that area to provide the same amenity, same or similar amenities that are there now, but it would require, a significant change to the landscape that everybody's used to, and, it's, there are also issues with the Harbor Park with the seawall and things like that that need to be addressed, but, so that project would, sort of change but replace, with, just it's sort of a different landscape design, so I think what was part of what was visualized with that design is, that area along where that river channel would be, would be more of a, more of like a almost like a beachy area, a little bit less formal, like asphalt path and things like that. But then when it came down around the corner, it would tie back in, with the library park and some opportunities for changing, sort of the arrangement of the paths and things. And obviously, the Harbor Park is, there's a real significance tied into the Spock and Olmsted Brothers and ultimately.
Go ahead.
We can have one.
So, yeah, and I'm sorry to switch gears here.
That's good.
Just been talking about this tributary, I think just going over here. Did you get the sense that that is, I hope we're historical, so I don't misuse it in the context of this kind of conversation, but is that something that's new pursuant to development? Like, or was there actually, is there any evidence of a tributary that preceded like any of these new cul-de-sacs that I think you talked about?
Yeah, there was certainly a drainage there before the cul-de-sac was more specifically, we'll definitely tell you after we do the assessment.
Right.
So a lot more about it, but it's a branch tributary. There's another branch that kind of goes due west. And then this one branches off and goes kind of more northerly up towards Thomas Street.
Well, and the reason I'm fixated on this is that, with this likely increase of these, weather events, that, if we're gonna see more rain coming through there, do we anticipate that I don't know that there's gonna end up being more sediment drawn into the river off of this tributary or other ones in that neighborhood?
Yeah.
And is that something we ought to be concerned with?
Yeah, I mean, just walked up through one morning so far, just kind of get an idea of what we should be looking at with that study. And I can say that, the erosion in that tributary is there's clearly a correlation with how the storm water not necessarily gets addressed in the development, but how it leaves the detention facility and enters the tributary. There's clearly some issues there. So I think, one of the outcomes of, and then, there is the other introduction of stormwater at the upstream end. Thomas is like a long road that, picks up a bunch of stormwater that gets delivered to the upstream end. So part of the assessment would be to understand both what the stresses are on that tributary, but then develop some ways to, address those issues, but then also, address them with the future in mind.
So I'm gonna put a pause in this conversation, because I think, Mike, we could keep you here 7 hours. And I know you're gonna come back, so it's this is really helpful, but I think, one of the key takeaways for me from this conversation is that it's all about trade-offs. We're not gonna have trade-offs and compromises, going all the way through resiliency to status quo. So that's really reframing the issue on how we're gonna think about the projects and stakeholder engagements and all different things, but that was super. Thank you, Mike.
And these questions really,
Yeah.
questions really do help guide how we prioritize our work, I work closely with Mike and make sure that we're getting what we want out of his work. So keep at him.
Do you want
And
to give
I'll
us an
give-
update?
Yeah,
on
I
the-
can make all these last things 5 minutes each, so.
Perfect.
Knox, Knowlton and Powder Mill, we went to Knowlton and Powder Mill this morning. It was really great. We chatted with Matt Warren, who's the owner of Knowlton Street Dam. And he would be happy to have us go anytime. I have a guy now. I have an in, so we can go walk on the footbridge and talk about some things. So I would love to organize sort of a private dam tour. I just wanted to do it myself first to see how long it would take and get the logistics organized and make sure we had the right people. But he had some interesting, he's very neutral on the topic and, he really wants to do what makes the most sense for his bottom line, and it's a hazard, and he wants, for the most part, he wants it gone. So I think it would be an interesting project to move forward with and figure out what that looks like and what that stakeholder engagement process is, which I do think the stakeholder engagement process is much easier to work through than, other dams along the river. And then we went to Powder Mill. Again, we met a guy whose land abuts it. And so he maintains a beautiful little path that goes right there. Also said we could go anytime. So I would love to take us all down there soon. I think he had a different take of, he wants to preserve what's there and figure out what that looks like for him and his visual impacts on what he's lived with for 50 years and how he appreciates the river. And so I think when we go there, we can think about that and what that looks like and what that means, and, bring it back to Mike and see what are the options there and what does removal look like. And then Knox Mill Dam, I haven't gone, but Deb's my man there, so. That's definitely much more of an involved stakeholder engagement process that we'll need to go through, and it has a lot more implications of landowner rights and it's not rights, but landowner conversation and and just figuring out
Real estate values.
real estate values and we do have a person in town who I think we should have come talk to us about, flood insurance and real estate values and what does that look like and what has she seen in the town and in the area related to that. So I'm going to set her up to speak sometime this fall. What?
No, I'm sorry.
Oh, I thought you were whispering something. I'm all ears, right? Anyway, sorry. So we'll stay tuned on that, and we'll keep going with those, but I'll ping you all about getting a date on the calendar for a private, I think it would be nice to just get this committee and just out for a walk and have a candid conversation with each other about what's going on. And
So you're planning a visit to all three, I assume.
yeah, I think we can figure out how to make that work and carpool, get a little van or something, but.
Well, you can walk between two of them.
I know, I walked today between all of them. It was a lovely walk. I knew it was gonna rain, and I was gonna be sitting all day, so. Anyway, got my steps in. And then accomplishments to date, we as in Lauren, because she crushes my.
Favorite part of my
infographic
job,
world.
favorite part of my job.
But she did a little overview of what you guys have done so far, and I just think it's important to give yourself, I know it feels like, come on, we need to do more, time is running out, we have to do all these things, but I think you guys have done a ton, and I just want to make sure that you know that, so that we can build off of that and keep going, and let's take this momentum and move forward. And that being said, I'll send out the data gap analysis and sort of highlight what we've done as it relates to that and what are our big major gaps. And two of the things that I'm hearing are related to floods and fish. And so we do want to close the loop on some of those things, right? And I think I've heard, maybe it was Susan, put some things to bed, like, what is the flood event? Let's define it, let's get to the committee, and get that on paper, and this is what we agree with. And so things like that, I think we should move forward. And so I think our next meeting, again, I tried to make a really light agenda and I gave us an hour and we still ran right through it, but I'll do it again. We'll do another big, discussion on the data gaps for the next meeting to hopefully accomplish another discussion around what did we learn and what do we want to learn and where's that headed. And then the next meeting dates, as I said, Matt Bernier and this other guy from NOAA, Jamie something. They're gonna come speak. We're gonna do a community conversation. I think it'll be at the Camp Bishopswood. We're just piggybacking off of the Good Watershed Association had a big meeting there, and it seemed to hold people well, and it was a beautiful space. And the idea being, we can ask them, how can these funds be spent? What are the different alternative options? How can we, make everyone happy? I think you asked some really good questions that we should table or move forward with to ask Matt. And so my goal is, over the next few weeks, can you all email me some questions? He's going to give probably a 20-minute presentation, and then I'm going to facilitate a Q&A with questions that we can solicit from the community so that we can have a really informed discussion with him about this grant program.
And that's a Wednesday meeting, is
Yeah,
that correct?
that was
Is it
my question.
posted?
So
There's a Wednesday.
is that a problem?
No, I just wanted to double check.
It's the only day that he could do
Okay,
in the next 2 months.
What's my,
I think 4 to 6.
and you said community conversations, so.
Yeah, so it's a public forum. We'll open it to everyone. All the seats. He has 100 seats. I hope we get.
Everyone knows that. Yeah.
Sorry, he's the NIFWIP grant administrator, so he works for the,
He's
No,
it's not the NIFU.
or sorry, NOAA grant
NOAA.
administrator. But he works very in tandem with, and he has like a NIFWIP in his title too.
Yeah, he's the main representative for the NOAA Restoration Center, who both is a conduit for funding, but then they also consult with NIFWIP on the grants that are submitted and things like that. So he's very, very versed in sort of funding realities.
And similar projects as well.
Yeah.
Wealth of knowledge.
Yeah, and he can talk to us a lot about, that's a good question to come with is what has worked in the past, what hasn't worked, some lessons learned, some failures, et cetera.
Just wanted to mention that there's a new funding out through NOAA, through the
Yeah.
infrastructure law, whatever. It's $260 million for fish passage. Some of it's, I think, 86 million going just to the tribal nations. The rest of it's all for removing barriers. For rivers, so.
Yeah.
That's-
And I have heard that the state is,
That's a key. concept.
Yeah. that's
yeah,
the-
yeah,
the-
yeah. Oh, good point. Does that August 23rd date work for anyone? Susan, Deb, do you know if August 23rd works for you? 10?
Yeah.
That's great.
I have no idea. I don't carry my calendar with me, but it's 4 to 6 and it's a Wednesday.
Yeah.
Good likelihood that will work.
Okay.
I'm not that good on my phone.
You're good at a lot of other things.
When you all get back to Dina in the next couple of days, because it's really important that the community is well represented at this event. And if you can't participate, you can always have Matt Bernie come back
Yeah, and I think he
He
wants
works
to
with
come
one
to a more
person.
intimate meeting as well, so.
as well.
And
Maybe
please
that's
send
fine.
questions you have, because I'm sure you have some good ones, but. And then, yeah, I think in September, if we, I mean, I would love for us to meet every week, but time just doesn't actually work that way, but. We could do a private dam tour up here or go check out a dam removal project. That's in the revegetation phase and sort of see what people have done in the past and how it could look. We could also do it in October, yeah,
Yeah, I'd like to do both. Yeah.
I think we should do both. I just want to try and get them on the calendar, so I'll.
When are we gonna talk about, how and when to let the community ask questions?
Yeah. Right now,
When? It's a when question.
I know, yeah. What do you want to, do you think we should have the community ask questions?
Yeah, that was one of the things we talked about earlier in the meeting.
No, I know, I'm asking you.
Yes, I do.
Okay, I do too.
I think it's very
you're
important.
saying during the speaker series.
Yeah, or at any of the meetings. I mean, if they come to a meeting like this.
Yeah.
If it would be a squeeze on time.
Yeah.
But if there are a few people who really want to ask a question.
Yeah.
I think we ought to find a way to make that happen, given the amount of interest that there seemed to be in the Warren study.
Yeah.
In being able to do that, and it might just be a flush of questions at the beginning and then.
And
Okay, and maybe not.
Another
might have
way
to
that we
limit
work through this with,
public comment time.
sorry, just real quick, another way that we work with this with other committees is the goal of you guys is to get questions from your people in your world or not your people, but just anyone, and bring them to this table or bring them to us beforehand so that we can, make the agenda around those questions, because yes, it's great to get those questions, but then thank you for your question, and that's great. And we do have the website, which we do receive a lot of questions. So we are receiving questions. We are, open to receiving questions, and I agree, we should open it to
But there's a
questions.
difference between someone being in a meeting
Totally.
and being able to ask a question and then continue. to
100%.
interact.
I just want to say, as well as doing that, let's also,
I think we have to find a way to make it work. I mean, originally, we proposed that the public could not ask questions because of the amount of work
I know.
that you guys do, and that this is your time to work on these issues, so it's prime time for you. And we prioritize the committee's work, but that doesn't say we can't evolve.
No, but having them ask questions is part of our learning.
Absolutely.
And I think that's part of the survey too, is let's hear what they want to know.
Could I ask a quick question? And then I'm really familiar with all this. I've worked on a bunch of fish pastures already for my drone service, but to Tyler's point about, we want to see these fish get all the way up into the Waganicook. Where do we stand on the east-west dam? I conceptually get everything except up to the east-west dam. Is that really a feasible part of getting a fish ladder in there? What's the idea for that? That's where I'm lost. I get everything else.
Yeah, I think there's a couple, it's a difficult site. It's not as easy as Seabright, but there are definitely options there. But that's part of, what this, so I think we resolved to a couple of options there in the feasibility study. One was a technical fish way over at the East Dam.
Mhm.
And then another was involved a nature-like fishway that utilized the channel downstream of the West Dam and joining over to the channel below the East Dam. But there's a dedicated, portion of the work under the grant that's like zeroing in on that issue, but.
Hydraulic fish ladder was something I worked on the St. Croix River.
Yeah,
Which was unique, and love to see it go all the way up into McGonagall
yeah.
any way possible. So
Yeah.
appreciate all the work you guys are doing.
Thank you so much.
Truly.
All right. Let's wrap this up, people, because it's time.
So,
My next.
do people want to,
Yeah.
and
Okay,
so
you
the
want to vote on this
question, yeah.
I think that might need a little more discussion. because I
We need to talk.
Yeah, I feel like I definitely agree that there needs to be more space for questions to be interjected in some ways. But I also hesitate to let it just be at any time because it can derail the process in a way that then becomes kind of hard to rein in.
I think what I had in mind was maybe not every meeting,
Right.
and having 10 minutes at the end of the meeting or in the middle of the meeting. So a limited number of minutes per event, and then not having it absolutely every meeting.
Yeah, I agree that, some of those parameters would be.
And I
So
think,
you have been so good at resolving some of these issues via email discussions, and I think we should solve that before the next meeting and implement it at the next meeting.
And maybe specify if you're talking about the speaker series or
Exactly.
this particular meeting or both.
I'll email around an example of how we do it on the school.
Excellent.
Because it's in the front of the meeting and everybody's capped at a certain amount. Here's the other piece about how you can only talk if you're from the school district, but we'll have to grapple with that.
So you'll share a model and the committee, you guys will have an email conversation and try to, and be now counting on you to bring that to the resolution.
perfect.
So that we know what to do for the next meeting. Is that satisfactory?
Yeah.
Awesome.
And I'll get with all the individual committees between now and the next meeting.
Who's my next?
I think I am, I think we're recycling
Right,
back.
yep.
All right, Ray, you're up. Oh, no, but no. okay.
Who's that right?
And do
You got out like, I think you have to do
I'm the end
it.
of the line, yeah.
Hey, Lauren, this is your last meeting with?
Yeah. She's gonna work with us a little bit while she goes
I
back
gotta
to
go
school.
read some more books for another year before.
When you're in town, don't hesitate, don't be a stranger.
We can go on a walk
We'll
with
walk
Christine.
All right.
Yeah.
You have a motion to adjourn.